Welcome to Chopping Wealth, one of the main features of the outsourced chief behavioral officer platform from Shaping Wealth. I'm Brian Portnoy, founder of Shaping Wealth. I would call myself CEO, but to say that you're CEO of a three-person company is maybe it's a four-person company. That doesn't feel particularly important, but we'll get the CEO stuff in a second. I have with me a guest today, a friend who I'm really excited to chat with, Paul Ollinger. Hey, Paul, how are you?
Hello, Brian. Thanks for having me. I'm good.
Yeah, yeah. Well, welcome to Chopping Wealth. I mean, for those who don't know Paul and his oeuvre, which is a word I know you like saying on your podcast.
That and I say specious a lot, apparently, too. So
So, the reason I wanted to have Paul on with us today, is that he is sort of what I'd call a wealth anthropologist. I'm going to let him tell his own story and make his own introduction. But Paul's in a really interesting place in this world where he gets to interact with and observe people and their money from a whole variety of different perspectives. So, Paul, welcome, and why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
thank you for having me. My name is Paul Ollinger. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing great. I have a podcast called Crazy Money. I've been doing it for 5 years. We've done 200, episode number 200 comes out tomorrow, Brian. So
Who is it?
it's Jared Dillian. He's got another book coming out in January called No Worries, How to Lead a Stress-Free Financial Life. And it's actually, I'm not really a personal finance guy, so it's sort of a departure. The the podcast is all about examining the connection between money, happiness, work, and meaning. And I came to it through my personal journey, which I'll describe in a minute. But I've interviewed everybody from Nobel Prize winning economists like or economist. Yeah, I guess he's an economist. Sir Angus Deaton of Princeton.
He won the Nobel.
He is a Nobel laureate, yeah, but he didn't win it for the work that he's known for, which is the no additional happiness over $75,000 a year work that he did with Kahneman. He did it for another study that he won it for another study that he won. But I got to talk to him in his office at Princeton, which was super fun. Then I crossed campus and talked to Peter Singer, who the New Yorker called the world's most influential living philosopher. I've talked to rock stars and broadcasters and athletes, people like Rich Beam, who won the PGA championship, Apollo Ono, who's won, many, many Olympic gold medals. And basically, we talk about success. Does success make you happy? What do you do after the success? What do you do when you get everything you want? What do you do when you lose everything? What happens when your husband gets a stage 4 cancer diagnosis? How do you keep working and raise your kids? So all different kinds of questions that all revolve around sort of, what is this role of money in our lives, and how much of it do I need to be happy?
So, it's great. It's great. And for those who aren't currently subscribed to the Crazy Money podcast, I would recommend it. I would actually go into the back catalog because you interviewed me early doors before you became too important to invite people like me back.
Nonsense, nonsense. I was looking at that, and do you know, by the way, hang on a second, I got to find this. Um, the person I interviewed right after you was Bill Browder, the guy who wrote Red Notice. And so that just demonstrates, like, I've talked to all these crazy different people that I've just kind of reached out to. I reached out to you because I saw the name of your book and I was like, oh, The Geometry of Wealth. Let me look at this. And I was like, oh, this guy's talking about exactly the same kinds of things that I care about. And that's how I found you. And then the next week I'm talking to this other guy who ran a $4 billion hedge fund in Russia and then became an enemy of Vladimir Putin. And then he's got this whole other journey that started. So this has been the podcast has been, I've benefited from it, from all the people I've gotten to meet just by asking the same questions a lot of other people care about.
Right, and the questions that you're asking are just timeless or perennial. We're gonna touch on a number of them. Let's start off with you and your money story. I've heard you talk about your parents and how you grew up, and you had a particular, life event working for a small social media startup. What's it called? Face.
It's called Meta. It's called Meta now. It's
Was that you on the rebranding?
no, no, I was long gone at that point. Right. Yeah.
I know, but money stories are so central to the way we navigate financial decisions. And tell us yours.
So I grew up in a large Catholic family in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia. 6 kids, two parents who stayed married for 55 years until my mom died. Great, great people. Um, my dad was a nuclear engineer at Georgia Power, the local utility. Very smart man, but he worked for the utility and he had 6 kids and he was a very frugal depression era guy. My mom worked at the church where we all went to school and then went to church. So we had lots of friends, lots of community, but there was always financial stress in our house. And I don't mean like my dad couldn't pay the bills. It was always that mentality of, well, we can't afford this or we can't afford that. And of course, 70 years later, my dad died and he had lots of money in the bank, but he was just of that generation where you don't spend on anything you don't need. And in fact, the most popular episode of the podcast is the one I had with my dad before he died, asking him, how do you raise 6 kids on, a limited budget? And this charming man who raised me just it resonated through the microphone to the audience. And people I meet that I've never met before have said, I've listened to that interview with your dad. What a wonderful human being. And he was, but that was the environment I grew up in. And I always thought my mentality was someday I'm going to make a lot of money because if I make a lot of money, I'm not going to be stressed about money, which is hilarious to say out loud because I know lots and lots of rich people, myself included, who still stress about money, right? Even though we have way more than we need, we still find ways to make to let money wrap us around the axle, right? So I went off to my formula became I'm going to be a great student because if I'm a great student, I'll get into a great college. If I get into a great college, I'll get a good job and then I'll make a lot of money. Typical Gen X mentality, right? And so I go into the business I eventually get an MBA from Dartmouth, and while I'm there, I'm invited to co-host a talent show. And in that evening was the first time I told jokes in front of an audience in my life. And the thing you don't want to learn at business school is that you want to be a comedian. But that's what I learned that night in 1996, probably after having borrowed $80,000 in 1996 dollars to get that MBA. So there's this crazy notion back then that when you borrow money, you actually have to pay it back. And so instead of becoming a comedian, I went into the digital media world. I worked for a music website called launch.com that was eventually bought by Yahoo for peanuts that Jerry Yang found in his couch. But they bought us at the nadir of the dot-com bubble. And so our Yahoo options got priced really, really low. And over the next 4 years, I made some money on stock options, paid off my student loans, and then moved to LA to become a comedian full time. I did that for 2 years, opened for people like Norm Macdonald and Dave Attell and Roseanne Barr, big, big names. But after 2 years, I still wasn't really headed in the direction as fast as I thought I would be. I thought when I moved to LA, people were going to be like, we've been waiting for you.
What wasn't your tagline straight out of Dartmouth?
Straight out of Dartmouth. Yeah, that really resonates with the average person. But I got engaged to my wife, and I thought, I want to have a family. I should probably get a real job again. And right about that time, a buddy of mine I had worked with at Yahoo called me and said, "Hey, do you want to come work at this little startup called Facebook?" That had about 200 employees at the time. And my reaction was, "What the hell? This company could be as big as MySpace someday." And that's the vision I had, Brian. That's how big my thinking was. And so I went to Facebook, became about the 250th employee. I worked there for 4.5 years, ran the West Coast sales team. For a lot of reasons I won't bore you with, I left the company, moved back to Atlanta where I grew up. And that's where, and I retired at 42 years old without a plan, thinking, well, I'll just figure it out. Meaning will find me. Money has found me, and now meaning will find me. And I goofed off, and then I just found myself sort of with kind of adrift and not knowing. I mean, I had a solid family, still have a solid family, very connected to my wife and kids, but I didn't know what to do with myself. For somebody that had chased professional accomplishment and money for decades, there I was sitting in my, study going, well, what the hell do I do now? And that's the disconcerting experience that people have when they make a lot of money without a plan that nobody expects. And that was the thing I wanted to examine. And that's when I started reading about money and writing about money. And that's when we started the podcast 5 years ago.
So, as you know, I think of you as somewhat of an anthropologist. a financial anthropologist who also is a stand-up comedian.
I'll take that.
There's a line that Morgan Housel uses, and I know he's been a guest on your show. He's a friend of mine, along the lines of comedians just cut through. If you really want to understand reality, just get a comedian's take. And I don't know if he was talking about you, but he was talking about a George Carlin or Chris Rock, or folks that can just really cut through. So I guess, are you surprised that your journey has taken you to this spot so far? Because connecting the story of your dad and your parents and living in the frugal upbringing, and then it's a fair amount of luck. You end up at this small company called Facebook, and it goes bonkers, and then you wonder out loud, well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? Because I'm kind of set for the back nine of life. Do you ever kind of express surprise to yourself, like, wow, was this my calling? Is this what I should be doing?
Well, it's the money was kind of like hitting a hole in one, right? Like, yes, if you hit a hole in one, you can get a lucky bounce, but you're trying to hit the ball to the hole. And so, I mean, I was pursuing wealth, and if I hadn't found it at Facebook, I would have found it someplace else. Maybe I wouldn't have retired at 42, but I would have had enough by the time I was 55 to figure it out. And really what, one of the really surprising things is when you think you have enough money and then you start hanging out in country clubs and places where that money gives you access to, you realize how little money you have relative to the other people, above you in the 1%. It's like what Charlie Sheen said, or Bud Fox said in Wall Street when he's signing all those papers next to the pool. And he goes, I never knew how broke I was until I started making a little bit of money. So, but now I really do see, I feel like I'm watching the world of money through a lens, kind of, it's like an adventure in affluence. Like I'm just looking around going, oh, this is how it works. This thing I pursued. The life journey that I had, that I just explained, we all construct a narrative looking backwards as to how we got here. That's the closest thing I can come up with. That's a true story that's halfway interesting, by the way. So, like, but I do think it's true. And I can see what's weird about what I do now is that 10 years ago, if you'd have told me you're you're gonna have money, but you're gonna choose to do something that's a lot of work, that pays nothing, and that is going to give you a ton of satisfaction, I would have said bullshit. Like there's no way I would do that. But that's what when you finally get to that point, you go, if I'm not a jerk and I don't have to get the plane, then I have enough money for me and my family to live a very nice life until I die. And you have to consciously say, okay, well, I'm going to do things that bring me value, that are really satisfying, and that when I wake up in the morning, I'm excited to go do it, as opposed to the way I felt with jobs I've had in the past, where you wake up and you look at your phone or you look at your laptop and you're like, I really don't want to open that thing. And so every morning I'm excited to open my laptop and write, to see who I'm going to book next for the podcast, to see who's subscribing to my Substack, free or paid, it doesn't matter. I just think, or who's commented on an article. It's just interesting to see where what I'm putting out into the world is resonating.
So the topic of enough is something I've written a fair bit about, you've written about, and to your role as sort of an observer of society, and you hobnob a bit. You're asked to give speeches at YPO events and places like that. What are your current observations about how the well-to-do in our society, which I think generally are can be some of the clients of the advisors who are on the call today. What are your current thoughts or observations about how much is enough? Do you feel like you're getting, or you're hearing different stories from different people? They sort of give you different answers, or conversely, are you observing kind of the same themes over and over again? Because this is something that we all struggle with, and you've blogged on this many times, quite beautifully. What's your current take on how much is enough based on your walkabout?
Well, I think people that come to me are probably not a representative population because they're seeking out this kind of question. I mean, by definition, they're attracted to these questions. But it does surprise me how many people really are struggling with these questions about fulfillment long after they've got way more money than they need. Or or people who are in that senior level professional services. I'm making 1 million, 2 million, 3 million bucks a year, but I hate my job. What do I do? Like I see that all around me. That's a real struggle that, when you're 25, you don't anticipate. Like you look at somebody who's, mid 50s, killing it at the top of the firm, whatever industry you're in, and you think, well, that guy's got it made or she's got it made. But there's a much bigger appetite for these discussions around meaning and happiness and fulfillment. And I think that might correspond to the way 25 years ago we didn't talk about mental health. Today we talk about mental health all the time. My kids, it's a subject in my kids' classroom. It's part of the conversation today in a way it wasn't decades ago. And I think that sort of filters over into the world of wealth. And you go, all right, well, really, how much do I need? And what am I willing to go do to get that? And then what does that buy me? I've got friends who, and a lot of YPOers deal with this. They've got a private company that they run. They've got family money. Either they started it or they've been entrusted with it from their father or their grandfather or whatever. And they've got to decide, well, what the hell do I do with this? And when I sell this, what do I do then? How much do I give to my kids? How am I going to set them up in a way that's going to, inspire them to work hard and not be, just irresponsible alcoholics who go that way because they don't have responsibilities to anybody. So I think these kinds of conversations are happening. Maybe they've always been happening. I just wasn't part of the part of the social group, but I see it now a whole lot around me.
Yeah, and that was going to be my follow-up question there, which is, are these questions that have always been around, but now we just sort of, because of social media, because of communications, it's not like mental health is a new issue, right? It's just that there's a different forum or communication channel for us to be having conversations about it. If you think back through the history of positive psychology, the science of happiness, Marty Seligman at University of Pennsylvania, gave a pretty famous speech in 1998. He was president of the American Psychological Association, and basically said, "Hey, here's the agenda for the next decade, the next quarter century, which is that we have to really put some effort, some research dollars into figuring out what makes people happy." Because he was observing, he didn't use this term, I use this term a lot, the paradox of prosperity. I mean, in the grand scheme of thing, Americans are doing okay.
Very well, but that doesn't mean that they're more mentally stable than the rest of the world who has less.
We're richer than ever, and arguably as miserable as we've ever been.
Well, as you ask in the geometry of wealth, at a certain point, the goal has always been more, and then at a certain point, you got to get at the question, more of what? Like, what are you working toward? And are those things that we've sort of we're conditioned unconsciously as children to get after that grade, to get after that exogenous, extrinsic symbol of success. And eventually I see this in myself again, using a backward looking narrative or a backward looking desire to answer questions, that I see myself in high school looking for extrinsic achievement to make myself feel okay. I must be doing okay because I've got the lead role in the play. I'm the captain of the football team. This overachieving was a desire to soothe, inner discomfort. And that eventually becomes money. It becomes status. It becomes your car. It becomes your job title. And at a certain point, there's a big, I've got a draft of a blog post, Substack post called "Is Happiness a Choice?" Right? Life, eternal question. And I think that we all grapple with, finding these places where we're going to be told we're okay until we get to a place to say, you know what, it's not what's out there, it's what's in here, and it's my decision to say I'm going to be okay, even if I don't have the biggest house on the block, even if my brother-in-law makes twice as much money as I do, even if I don't have as many social media followers as I like. I got to be okay with it because abdicating that to these external things is puts me in a position of victimhood, and I don't want to be in that position.
Let me put you on the spot.
I'm 6'1", 225. Is that what you're trying to get at? I have put on some weight.
Well, since I saw you at the Starbucks at North and Wells, you don't look as good. But I didn't want to say anything.
Thank you. Thank you for your discretion.
I was going to call you afterwards with the kind of a bat signal. I'm here to help. No, I mean, so our audience is primarily financial advisors, and they have or can have these sorts of conversations about how much is enough, what are the sources of contentment, and so forth. If you were coaching advisors on this, given how many conversations you've had, how many speeches you've given, how many blogs, Substacks you've posted, what would be kind of some of the key principles that you would point toward? What would be some of the good questions or conversations? Because my view is that clients want to have these conversations. They kind of don't care what the earnings estimate on the S&P 500 is. They might sit and listen to a market overview, but they don't really care about that market view. They want to answer very personal questions about whether they're going to be okay and how much is enough. Just given the vast breadth of engagements you've had on these topics, how would you counsel financial advisors who might be by the books? Let's just go through the numbers. How would you counsel them to broaden the conversation where it might actually be a little bit uncomfortable, where there might be some vulnerability?
Yeah. Well, I've been on the other side of that conversation. Um, and, you know, fights, for example, fights in marriage aren't about, money fights in marriage aren't about money. They're about values. They're about history. They're about the money scripts that the respective spouses learned as kids. And so, um, and an advisor has to be friend to both partners in that situation. Inserting yourself in that conversation could be a tricky thing to do. I guess my point would be to say there's resources out there about every topic couples run into, about families run into. And so as an advisor, you want to be 100% your client's advocate no matter what. Um, Including the times you want to steer him or her back toward the maybe a more healthy place to be emotionally around money. Um, but you probably don't want to be the person lecturing them. You probably want to steer them to resources to say, hey, you know what, you're talking to me about wanting to raise your kids with values around money. There's this great book by Ron Lieber called The Opposite of Spoiled that is really easy to read, has very practical advice for everything from 4 and 5-year-olds and allowance to college kids and how much money they should be spending on clothing or a new car, et cetera. And, or they're struggling with how much to pay for college. Ron wrote a book about that too. So there's a lot of very good resources out there on any topic that you're running into. And if you can slowly and as smoothly or unobtrusively as possible help steer your clients toward those resources that they would actually consume. I mean, how many books have been given at financial conferences? What percentage of books that are given at financial conferences are actually read? Very, very few, probably. So if you can steer them to, if they're the reading type, steer them to books. If they're the video type, steer them to YouTube channels or whatever for these lessons that can be digested in whatever way they can be digested. Morgan's book sold 4 million copies and is still going. Is that because he appeared on the Crazy Money podcast? Maybe, Brian, maybe. Causation, correlation, it's hard to say. But it does demonstrate that there's an appetite out there to read very well written insights into money that go back. I'm not sure what the oldest anecdote he shares in that book is, but humans have been writing and struggling with money as far back as the Gospels and Greek philosophy. So these are timeless questions, and there's resources out there to consume on the topics.
Talk about generations, Boomer, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. I think Gen Alpha is next. Is that what?
Am I going to see Gen Alpha? I guess. Hopefully, yeah.
Well, we're the exact same age. We have kids similar age, so
Are our kids Gen Alpha or are they Gen Z?
they're Gen Z, but our kids are going to have kids.
Their kids will be Gen Alpha.
in your so on your walkabout as this financial anthropologist, what are you observing about the differences between generations? And I'm not going to go into politics at all. You've written some pretty heady stuff lately on politics, which I'm probably not going to get into, but we'll see.
That'll be in the after party.
That'll be in the after party. I'm going to finish my LaCroix and maybe move on to something harder, even though it's early afternoon when we're recording this. But we think about generational values, and you told a story about your parents and the way they were. I could do the same. Gen X, the best generation. I think we can agree to that. The forgotten generation that sort of just supports everybody else. Millennials have a rep. Gen Z has a rep. And I'm curious what on these topics of money, happiness, wealth, and so forth, how you see society changing. I'm not going to do the, shake my fist and, kids these days, they just don't, appreciate the value of a dollar. But are you seeing generational shifts in values as it relates to money? And I'll layer onto that just a sub question of, is it just a matter of, well, Gen Z, they're not old enough yet to have kids and mid-stage careers, and so when they get there, they're going to act just like us. So, again, I hope everyone appreciates, like, you're all over the place. You're on comedy stages. You're speaking all over the place. You're meeting a ton of people. You really have eyes on America, which is a pretty strange place these days. How are things changing from a generational perspective?
Well, I really strive. What I think what's missing in our political discourse, and this relates to finances and the economy and employment and the duty of Americans to take care of themselves. The student loan issue that I referenced snarkily earlier in the conversation. I really am trying to keep myself. What I think is missing in those conversations is reasonable discussion that allows for differences of opinion to be evaluated and considered and turned around. At the same time, there are certain values that I have that I think will never go out of fashion. Hard work, self-reliance, all that kind of stuff. But there's a tendency for all of us as we get older, Brian, to turn into the guy screaming, "Get off my lawn." And, um, I get a lot of books sent to me by publicists for people who, trying to get, have the authors on the show and stuff. And one that was sent a few years ago was called "Okay Boomer," and it was written by an author who was talking about Gen Y, and the way in which Gen X and Boomers had basically put them in such a horrible financial position that that we're lecturing them, and yet we've done them a huge disservice by putting them in this position. And then she went on to describe how she couldn't make her law school student loan payments working as a freelance writer. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you went to NYU Law School. You're not supposed to be a freelance writer. You're supposed to be a lawyer, at least to the point until you pay off your student loans and you've earned your freedom. That's the contract. And you're a smart person. If you can get into NYU Law School at 22 years old, you're smart enough to do the math to figure out what it's going to take to pay your student loans back. And if you haven't done the math, that's willful disregard of the realities of life. And that sounds a little bit like me screaming, "Get off my lawn," but it's true. It's absolutely true. And we see this in the culture everywhere we go. People willfully put themselves in a position where they can scream victimhood about whatever, their student loan balance, their employer, whatever. I shouldn't have to do this work. The government should send me money. I'm not a hard right winger. I'm a centrist, and I lean left on a few issues and I lean right on a few issues. As when it comes to finances and personal responsibility, I skew a little bit right. as you can tell. But I really do see this as a generational difference. Now, at the same time, I've interviewed fire movement adherents who are 26 years old, and they are living the cultish philosophy of financial independence, retire early. And while I think that is at least less, it hurts other people less, it doesn't necessarily scream of, I'm thinking about life as a long-term investment. I'm thinking about my career as something I want to, you know, I want to inhabit for a decade or two, as opposed to I'm gonna eat less ramen than you are, and I'm gonna prove I'm more dedicated to this movement. So yeah, there's some really, but I at least admire that, to not want to carry debt, to not want to be beholden to other people for their job and their livelihood. And the independence part of it is really appealing. I just think it's sort of probably like a crash diet that isn't going to be so good for them in the long run.
So we have a question in the chat from Brian Rebson. He writes, "Where is your finish line? How do you define success after the early success you've had?" And this next question, as part of that, he said, "I love this. What are some wins you have had in teaching your children financial wisdom?"
That presumes a lot.
That there's been a win.
So my kids are 12 and 14. My daughter turns 13 next month, and they're great kids. But they're middle schoolers and they're teenagers. My son, they both go to very nice camps in the summer. My son's gone for 2 weeks in British Columbia. They take their phones from him. So we haven't heard from him in 2 weeks. We know when his flight home is, and so we know he'll be getting his phone back that morning. And 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 so I'm watching my texts, like I want to talk to my son. I want to hear how camp went. I want to hear if he met any, friends, that kind of thing. And I get a text from him and it says, "Can you put $84 in my green light?" That's the first thing he says. He didn't say, "Hi, how are you?" And Green Light is this debit card for kids. It's actually an Atlanta-based company. And I'm like, well, there you go. That's what it's like to have a 13-year-old coming back from camp in 2023. And so have I taught my kids, have I had wins financially? Maybe. My daughter is the exact opposite. Like my son gets money and wants to spend it immediately on soccer stuff, and he's a big aviation fanatic. He buys airplanes and stuff. My daughter, on the other hand, goes, "Hey, what's my balance in my green light?" And she goes, "Ooh, money." And I'm like, so they're very different, and I don't know if I've succeeded or failed with either of them in either way, but we're trying anyway. Where's my finish line? There is no finish line, you know? Like what I'm trying to do now is do the things that I get joy from doing, that I get personal satisfaction from doing, which includes driving my kids to school every day, which includes driving them to swim team tonight. And I'm trying to have my creative endeavors be a break-even proposition, so I'm not, at least not digging into the principle. And we're living a responsible financial life while also not foregoing opportunities we will never have again. So, for example, a few years back, my wife said we should go on safari. And I was like, oh my God, that's going to be, whatever the number, 80, 100,000 or whatever the number is. And I was like, that's crazy. That's irresponsible. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, you have the money. You can do it. You can't do it every year. You can't do it, every 3 years. But we did it. We did it during COVID, and it turned out to be the most fabulous trip I could ever imagine. And we'll have those memories forever. I don't regret spending that money. Um, but it's all about trying to keep it at least in between the lines, to say, um, we're not leaving anything on the table, but we're also not being so reckless that, we're going to run out of cash in 20 years. My finish line it's more like, am I doing the things on a daily basis that I believe are worth doing and bring me joy? And that's what I'm doing. I feel pretty good about that.
It's great. That's great. Eric Jones, uh, a buddy of mine, Jonesy, he has a good question here, and it kind of taps into or connects to the generational question that I asked you. He says, has the tech industry, big payouts during IPOs, M&A, just high relative salaries distort how younger generations think about their careers, prepare for their careers? when he was in school, he's a bit younger than us. I feel like a six-figure salary was reserved for, the top, the engineers, the doctors, the lawyers, serious entrepreneurs. Now companies like Meta are paying starting salaries of 250K with 250K stock bonuses. What's the impact of those distortions on the future marketplace? And I'll throw in there a data point and an observation. The Wall Street Journal had an article 2 weeks ago now reporting on some research done by the financial services firm Empower, where they asked different generational cohorts how much was enough. And for Gen Z, Gen X, and boomers, it was sort of 130 to 150K. You could sort of afford the lifestyle that you wanted. For millennials, it was $529,000 in order to feel happy.
I'd love to make $500,000 again. That would be fantastic. If I could do it doing the things I want to do, it would be mind blowing. Everybody wants to say this, the younger generations are entitled. They said it about us. The boomers said it about us. We said it about the millennials. The millennials will say it about Gen Z. Are they entitled? Well, I mean, I think some of these starting salaries, you have to look at them from the real value of money, because $250,000 in in Silicon Valley, it's a lot less than it would be in Atlanta, Georgia, or even in Chicago. And so I think 250 in Silicon Valley kind of is the new 100K, sad to say. But it's also been, 25 years since you thought 100K was a lot of money. Um, and so I think, what worries me a little bit is that you hear them talk about, like, the housing market's broken, and, I can't afford a house, and you're 26. And it's like, well, I didn't own a house till I was 40, right? I didn't pay off my student loans till I was 32, 33, right? So I had a zero net worth well into my 30s. So, and you asked earlier about, because I'm do comedy, I hang out with a lot of people who are very different and much, much younger than the people I worked with at Facebook, at Yahoo, the people I went to school with at Dartmouth, who are in finance and consulting, and they're CEOs and stuff. So I go to bars in parts of town I would never go to. I have conversations with young Black women that I would never meet hanging out in my neighborhood, right? So I do get exposure. I do find a little bit of that, the economy is broken and it's against me mentality from the younger generation, that I really wish I could somehow help them see that if you want to make money in this country, it is sitting out there waiting for you. If you decide you want to be a victim, well, you can live that life too. And that's not, I mentioned Black woman, this not based on race, it's not based on gender. I do believe it's generational. It's based on a mindset. It's based on how they were raised. It's based on what they saw in their homes. And so um it does worry me, because I wish for them. I don't necessarily wish for them the same kind of, like, I'm going to go kill it type A attitude I had when I was 30, but I wish they said, you know what, my financial future's in my hands and I can make it happen. And by the way, if you want to be financially stable, don't be a stand-up comedian. And it's not anybody else's, right. It's not the government's responsibility. It's not the other taxpayers' responsibility to pay for your dreams. That's your dream. And if you're broke because you're a stand-up comedian, own it. Don't blame it on somebody else. You're pursuing a very economically unstable path. That's on you.
And you're kind of making there's this word that has been invented recently called the vibe session, which is this idea that the economy is doing quite well, but people are miserable. There's a recession in vibes. So
I have not heard it put that way.
yes, I think it's Kyla Scanlon, who's become a YouTube, TikTok superstar, who coined that. And I think it entered the dictionary recently, vibe session. Um, complete left turn question, but it's my show, so I get to ask whatever I want. What do people find funny? You're funny. I've watched your stuff. We've gotten to know each other. I'm not telling you to amuse me. This isn't a scene from Goodfellas. So, you think I'm funny? What am I, a clown? Um, but you travel around, you do stand up, you have been on stage with some of the biggest names, but you also go to Uncle Joe's Chuckle Hut in rural Tennessee and you do those sorts of shows also. What gets people laughing nowadays? We're kind of unhappy as a society. Like, is laughing good? Do people want to laugh? And what do they laugh at?
The Comedy Catch in Chattanooga is close to what you just said. It's a very nice club. People run it are lovely. But it's interesting. What works in Chattanooga isn't necessarily the same thing that works, in a bar in downtown Atlanta. And what works there isn't necessarily what I would do. I do a lot of shows at country clubs around the Southeast. We've done 30 in the past year and a half, 2.5 years. And those audiences are fantastic audiences. When I was doing comedy at Yahoo sales conferences before I moved out to LA. And it's when you're talking to somebody whose life you truly understand, who has the same worries and concerns and life experiences as you've had, it's a lot easier to make them laugh than it is to make somebody whose life experience you don't share. If I went to the Apollo Theater in Harlem, I would get booed off that stage. I don't know. My humor doesn't necessarily translate into into that scenario. You learn things the more you do it to be able to relate to any crowd. And as much as you hear about, people being canceled or people being worried about being canceled, I don't really do political material because I'm not good enough, or I haven't figured out how to do it in a way that doesn't just make the audience stop listening. There's a lot of the people who are successful at it are showing, not telling, as every writer knows they should be doing. Um, and so people definitely want to laugh, but the things they're laughing at, I'm reading this great book called Comedy Book. Jesse David Fox, I think is the writer, the author. And just this morning I read, um, the things that people still laugh at are relationships, dating, marriage, kids. It all comes down to those fundamental things that we care about, that we stress about, that we love, and that we think about all the time. Um, and that also demonstrate, I mean, I talk about my marriage a lot. I, I, I don't make fun of my wife, but I use her as a tool through which to view my anxiety and insanity. And so it makes it look as if, somebody gave her a hug the other night after a show to say, "Oh, I don't think he believes all that." And it's not about her, it's about like my weirdness, and she just happens to have a front row seat to it.
Um, getting some good questions here, and a lot of them just coming back to the lessons that you want to impart on your family and in your community. One of the questions here from Cody is that the legacy you want to leave your kids, and they're interviewed in 25 years from now. What do you want them to remember about money in their adolescence and growing up? In some ways, how do you want to? The word that's coming to mind is modeling. What sort of behavior or attitudes do you want to model for your 14 and 12-year-old, soon to be 13-year-old? Happy birthday! Like, how do you think about that?
So because this is not public forum, I'll share this anecdote. It's holiday time, and every year we give our housekeeper a bonus at holiday time. And and my point in doing I had my kids sign the card for them this morning because I want them to understand that this person that works in our house is a valued human being that we treat with respect and gratitude. And there was a large stack of cash on the table this morning. And my son said, "How much money is that?" And I'm not going to say exactly, but it was thousands of dollars. And he was like, "Wow, that's a lot of money." And I was like, "She works hard. She doesn't make a lot of money. This means way more to her than it will mean to us," that kind of thing. And um, I hope he remembers that. I hope he remembers that I'm not I'm not a perfect guy. I'm by no means. And I'm not always consistent. I don't always consistently model good financial behavior, but I hope he remembers that being generous to the people around you is is the right thing to do. Um, and I hope, we talk about money a lot. We have friends who are billionaires, and we have friends who have, a tenth of what we have, a hundredth of what we have, and we treat everybody the same. That's the idea anyway. And we talk about, like, you know, um, there's a joke I tell that my son came home from his really rich friend's house, the billionaire folks, when he was 7, and said, "Hey, Dad, when are we going to hire a chef?" And I was like, you know, so I put my arm around his shoulder and I said, "Son, fuck you," because that's you. You want a chef? I grew up with a chef, Chef Boyardee, right? That's like I'm trying. We're trying to demonstrate that, like, you know, you have a lot. You're very, very fortunate, without beating them over the head with it or trying to make them feel guilty for being very fortunate kids.
You wrote a really powerful blog. I don't remember the exact date, but it wasn't that long ago, within the last probably year or so, about envy and social comparison. And you made a powerful point about when you see somebody who and you want what they have, whatever that item is. I wrote it down. Don't covet, emulate. I think I love that. I think I'm gonna talk to my kids about that. But I want to hear it from you. Actually, what do you mean by don't covet, emulate?
Well, this is all about half the reason I write this stuff and do the podcast is to remind me to adhere to these things that I say that I believe. And I do believe them. But I will catch myself feeling envious of other people. And I have to remind myself, like, look, if you want what somebody else has, well, ask yourself, do you want the whole package? Because it's not it you can't pick and choose. I want their money, but not their marriage or whatever illness that happened in their family or whatever. Like, it's a package deal. You don't get to pick and choose. And if you want their money, if you want their accomplishments, are you willing to do what they did to get it? If I wanted a jet, if I wanted a NetJets card, let's make it more achievable. All I would need to do is go out and get a job making $1 million a year, which 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 wouldn't is certainly achievable. But I wouldn't get to do this stuff that I'm doing now that I enjoy, that really feels like an expression of me. So I'm choosing to do the things that I want to do, as opposed to worrying about not having that next level of wealth. So it's not even just about emulating, it's about also asking yourself, what are you willing to do? And if you're not willing to do it, let it go. Stop worrying about it, because you've made a decision, you've made an unconscious choice that you're happier not having that thing and doing what you want to do. But it's real easy to get tripped up and say, well, the life is unfair, I should have that too.
So this is going to be so random, but you make frequent reference to the Yellowstone Club in your podcasts and in some of your blogs. Is that your rosebud? Is that your sled? I know what the Yellowstone Club is, and for those I've never been there, I probably wouldn't be welcome. But I have friends who are wealthy and have homes there. What is this? Is this your rosebud?
No, it's not. It really isn't. And even if I had the money, I'm not sure I'd join, but it is really nice. And
Tell people what the Yellowstone.
okay. So the Yellowstone Club is this private club in Big Sky, Montana. And the members are like Phil Mickelson, Justin Timberlake. In fact, I met Justin Timberlake when I was there last spring. Uh, Tom Brady, uh, big icons of industry. Like, the cheapest house there is like $12 million for a 2 bedroom, something, like condo. And then and it costs what, a half million a year and dues and maintenance and blah blah blah. And it's incredible. It's this gorgeous piece of property in the mountains of Montana, where there's championship golf courses and there's private skiing, right? That means no lift lines, literally no lift lines anywhere on the mountain. And it's just deluxe. Everything you can think of in the world is there. The reason I use it so often is because it's one of these things that before you make money, you don't even know exists. You don't even know to want to be at the Yellowstone Club, because it's not a part of your of the between you and the horizon. You can't see it. And so I tell this story about how as we increase in affluence, as our world view expands, as our world of money view expands, beyond mere, you know, upper middle class affluence, we start to see these things we didn't know existed. So I talk about the story of learning to ski. So I grew up in suburban Atlanta, one of six kids. My parents couldn't get us to the slopes, let alone pay for the, $25 hot dogs at the base. And so I started skiing when I was at Dartmouth at the Dartmouth Skiway, which is this little rocky hill. You ski on icy snow, and half the people there are in jeans. Well, a few years later, I go to someplace, I go to Breckenridge, and then I go to Deer Valley. Well, Deer Valley, that's five-star skiing, fluffy powder, blue skies. There's a St. Regis. This is the best. And then you go to the Yellowstone Club and you're like, oh, wait a minute, there's this other level. And every time you take a step up, you start to think, oh, well, Deer Valley's a shithole, right? Like, why would I slum it at Deer Valley when I could be up here? And that's just the way we're wired. And these experiences, every time you go to this next level, you go, and I'm sure this happens with people who own jets. They get the entry level jet, and then somebody pulls up in a bigger jet next to them, and they're like, "Oh, I want that one." There's this during right before COVID, we were on spring break, and we were sailing around the BVI with another family on a like a catamaran. It was amazing. Nice boat, wasn't huge, but you're in the most beautiful part of the world, and every day is just like, we're going to go park in this cove, and we're going to jet ski, and we're going to drink rum runners, and it's going to be spectacular. And you do that. Well, one morning we went to sleep and then woke up, and there's this yacht next to us, this giant freaking yacht. And I was looking at that yacht, and I was like, I was jealous of the people on that yacht. And yet they're looking at the same beach, the same sky, the same pure blue water, but I felt bad because I'm not on that yacht. And these are the games our brains play with us. And there's a million different examples from whatever category of spending and desire and wants versus needs that you want to use. But if you don't check your desire to be a part of the Yellowstone Club as opposed to going to Deer Valley or even your local skiway, if you don't check your, the that thing that makes you think you're less than because you're not on the biggest yacht, you're going to be miserable. Even if you're, think about this, and this is all part of being the steep curve of the 1%. The nine from 0% to the 98.9th percentile covers $10 million of net worth. $10 million. From 99.001% to 99.999%, $240 billion range. And so you might be in the 1% and you start hanging out with these people, but you have 1/100th of what they have, or 1/1000th. So our feelings of envy get worse the more money we have, because the difference between us and our neighbor becomes exponential, and it messes with our heads, even though we're some of the wealthiest, most luxury bedecked human beings in the history of the planet.
No, I get it. I get it. Yeah, you should write a blog called "The Slums of the 1%."
It's kind of true. It's like the most jealous people are the people that have like $5 or $10 million. Do you remember that Succession episode?
Yeah, Ben Carlson, famous blogger, just wrote a blog in the last few days where he put the YouTube clip on this and on that, and
He's like, 5 million, you don't want to be there. That's sad. Too rich to work, not rich enough to do it.
I know. Have you seen people back to sort of your junior anthropologist role here in Money America? Have you seen some people be better than others at resisting lifestyle creep? And is it just that's the way they are, or have some been good at finding discipline? Because we all encounter that lifestyle creep. We all move the goalposts in one way or another. Have you seen some people be better than others?
I think I think the way to answer that question is to say I don't know. Because honestly, I think there's a lot of people who put up a big front and are probably, stressing pretty hard, when they're looking at their monthly cash flow. Um, and what I wish for those people is, man, sell the Porsche. No, I don't, you're not my friend because you have a cool car. I like you for who you are. Don't, Don't try to keep up because nobody really cares about that stuff. But I don't know. I mean, I have a few people that I feel like, oh, I think that guy is probably skating on thinnish ice, and I wish he wouldn't. Um, Other people, we'll find out in 10 years, you know, or the next time the tide goes out, as Warren Buffett says.
And as you know well, that book, The Millionaire Next Door, was a story of all these millionaires who, you would have no idea. Modest homes, uh, modest cars, and all of that.
And I mean, I think, I was debating this with Jared Dillian because he talks about this in his new book. And I do think there's more, um, he's talking about the difference between cheap people and high rollers. And I certainly think that high rollers are more dangerous for society than the cheap people. But I don't think there's necessarily a ton of virtue in not enjoying your money and then leaving there's a guy in Indiana who died like 2 weeks ago who left $13 million to local charities, and he lived, just a really, really low end lifestyle. And obviously that's his choice, but I don't think there's necessarily a ton of virtue in that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This hour went by really, really fast. Before we go, because I want people to know your work in its various expressions, how can people find you?
Well, my website is paulollinger.com. That's Ollinger. My Substack is called Money and the Meaning of Life, and it's paulollinger.substack.com. And my podcast is called Crazy Money, which is on all the different podcast apps. And anybody can email me at paulollinger@gmail anytime they want.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, the Crazy Money podcast is tight. I really enjoy listening to episodes, and you get great guests. So congrats on well, thanks for helping us think through these issues, Paul. And for everybody who showed up today, thank you very much. This has been Chopping Wealth, a feature of your outsourced chief behavioral officer. I wish everybody well and very happy holidays to everybody. Take care.